Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's event is entitled Planting New Roots, Picturing Jewish and Native Migration Narratives in the Museum, and it features three special guests: Catherine Lloyd, who's Senior Director of Programs and Interpretation at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum; Stacy Halfmoon, who's Senior Director of the Choctaw Cultural Center; and Zach Rissinger, the 2021 Kupferberg Holocaust Center Fellow and graduate of the CUNY School of Professional Studies Museum Studies MA program. It also marks the launch of the KHC's newest library guide, Native Survivance in North America, exploring Native history, culture, and identity on Turtle Island. Today's event is part of the Human Rights and Museum series, which is a collaboration between the KHC and the Gallery and Museum Studies program at Queensborough Community College, and it's also co-sponsored by our colleagues at the Center for the Study of Human Rights and Genocide at Rutgers University. This discussion is also connected to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center's newest exhibition, The Concentration Camps Inside the Nazi System of Incarceration and Genocide. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York, is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, including towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. You can find more information about these atrocities expressed through the lens of contemporary art in the KHC's exhibition, Survivance and Sovereignty on Turtle Island, Engaging with Contemporary Native American Art. So to kick things off, please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A feature on our screen, as we've disabled the chat for security purposes. And now it's my great pleasure to turn things over to my esteemed colleague, Kat Griffin. She's program coordinator and faculty member in the Gallery and Museum Studies program at QCC. Turning it over to Kat.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I also want to thank Victoria Fernandez and Marissa Berman Hollywood of the KHC for their work on today's program, and a very warm welcome to our esteemed speakers. Many thanks to the Queensborough Community College Art and Design Department, Anne-Marie Coffey, Kenneth Powell, and Chair of the Department, Kathleen Wentrack. As Laura mentioned, I'm a faculty member in Gallery Museum Studies and the program coordinator for the program. It's the only associate's degree in the discipline offered in CUNY, making it a uniquely affordable entry point in our field in New York. I welcome questions about the program, so feel free to reach out. I'm also a faculty member at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, Museum Studies MA program in collaboration with the New York Historical Society. I welcome all the students who are here today, and also, of course, all the community members. This is the fourth in this ongoing event series that Laura spoke about, Human Rights and the Museum. And the series comes out of the Living Land Acknowledgement Laura shared, which resulted from the Native American Survivance Project at the KHC, which began in 2018. For this reason, Indigenous voices and viewpoints are centered in many of the events in this program, and this being one of them. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce the organizer of today's program, Zach Rissinger. While I originally met Zach when he was an MA candidate in the CUNY School of Professional Studies Museum Studies program, I can very easily say at this point, I have certainly learned as much from Zach as maybe the other way around. It has been my distinct pleasure to work with Zach in the context of his recent curatorial fellowship with the KHC, and I'm very happy to congratulate him on his graduation from the MA program this past May. In addition to these accomplishments, Zach is a cultural member of the Cherokee Nation who has consulted museums throughout the United States and Canada on best practices to engage audiences with Indigenous art and artifacts. He's worked extensively with the Met, the American Museum of Natural History, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. He recently served as the DEI consultant for Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway. Zach, the Zoom stage is yours.
Thank you, Kat, so much. I think it's working, yes. All right. So as Kat mentioned, I just completed the curatorial fellowship where I worked on constructing an online library guide to help enhance some of the topics explored in the exhibition mentioned, Survivance and Sovereignty on Turtle Island, Engaging with Contemporary Native American Art. The library guide is not a detailed exhibition catalog, but rather it uses pieces in the exhibition as a catalyst to explore larger issues pertaining to contemporary Native identity in the United States and Canada. And I will show you a bit of this right now. So this is an introduction here. So what it is there's so much I wanted to sort of talk about. It was a really daunting task, but I, because especially a lot of people don't have a lot of exposure to Indigenous history or even people for that matter. So in the end, what I did was focus on several key issues here, key topics, such as this one here, History and Falsehoods, where I utilize the QCC's resources, educational resources, which are also available to anyone with any CUNY affiliation as well, in order to provide deeper insights to the topics explored, as well as providing other resources as well, often by Native artists or authors, to provide insights on the issues explored in the library guide. So here's just a few of the ways we did this. We'd use pieces as an end to talk about this, as well as showcasing thoughts from the artist as well. Here's one theme, identity and culture is another, which is a really complicated issue in itself. So there's videos as well. One of my favorite pieces here by Erica Lord was featured. And then the other aspect of this is teaching tools, which provides resources for any educators that might want sources that are trusted sources, vetted sources that provide them information to help construct curriculums for their classes. Again, using QCC resources as well, but especially in this section, some other resources. Here's a link to other educational components that KHC has compiled for programming associated with their mission. And so this is what I came up with. And during the course of this, I will stop my share here. You can check that out. Here we are, check that out. And during the course of this, I started working with KHC and on this library guide, and I had a lot of questions about, why we came to this, like where Indigenous voices fit into the programming of KHC. And it led me to think about a bigger question, which is like, what do these two people or these two groups have in common besides genocide? And so I came up with what seems like a really simple conclusion, but both groups were subjected to forced migration, which led me to an even bigger question, and the reason we're all here today, which is how does forced migration influence contemporary identity, and what can museums do to illuminate these issues? And I am so excited for you to hear the two speakers who are doing amazing work and tackling this very issue. I asked them both to think about their work through the lens of forced migration and identity. And while preparing this program, we had a lot of really great conversations and some aha moments that I can't wait for you to hear and then hopefully be inspired to continue this conversation well after this program. So later in the program, you'll hear from our second speaker, Stacy Halfmoon, who's the Senior Director of the Choctaw Cultural Center in Durant, Oklahoma. But first, I am thrilled to introduce Catherine Lloyd, who is the Senior Director of Programs and Interpretation at the Tenement Museum here in New York City, where she collaborates on museum programming and educator training to explore social issues through personal experiences and to connect people to each other through interpretation of the past. Most recently, she led the project team that developed the museum's newest tour, Reclaiming Black Spaces, and collaborated on the launch of the museum's virtual program initiative. Catherine, thank you so much for being here. And to start, I know maybe just tell us a little bit about the Tenement Museum, which is one of my favorite museums in New York City, and then go into a bit more depth about how one particular exhibition at your museum explores some of the topics we discussed today.
Thank you, Zach, for that wonderful introduction. It's an honor to be here with you all this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for having me to speak about the Tenement Museum. Maybe some of you have visited the Tenement Museum before. I'll share a little bit about our museum, what we do, and then talk about one particular exhibit that really fits into the topic today. So the Tenement Museum is located in two historic tenement buildings on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Here we have 97 and 103 Orchard Street. And what we do at the museum is recreate apartments to tell the stories of different real families who lived in these two buildings from as early as the 1860s, really all the way through the 20th century. We've always looked at stories of migration, but for most of our history, we've been known as an immigration museum, looking at stories of people who immigrated by choice and their children. And so it's particularly interesting for me to explore this question of forced migration and looking at a wider umbrella of migration experiences through our newest exhibit that I'll share with you today. So we do research into the real families. Here in the bottom right, you see some of the photographs of people that we interpret at the museum. But one of the biggest things that is a little different about the Tenement Museum is that all of our visitor experiences are by guided tour. So here are just a couple of images of guided tours that we offer, both of our recreated apartments where we invite visitors into these recreated homes and walking tours of the Lower East Side neighborhood. So this means that every visitor really connects with an educator. This is what we call our tour guides, and is in a group with often a group of strangers, people they've never met before, coming into these spaces to hear stories of these real people. And so in 2017, we opened a new exhibit in this building right here, 103 Orchard Street. And in that exhibit, we really, for the first time, moved beyond the 1930s. We started looking at histories of the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. And we also started looking at stories of migration outside of what we might think of with immigration. We look at stories of a Puerto Rican family who came to New York in the 1950s, the story of a Chinese American family who came in the 1960s, and the story that I'll tell you a little bit about today, the story of the Epstein family, who moved into this building in the 1940s. And so the Epsteins, they are a Jewish-Polish family. The parents were Holocaust survivors, and they raised their two daughters in this building. And it was really the first time that the museum had explored the story of Holocaust survivors, explored the story of forced migration, and connected to these experiences more widely. But we do that through the stories of real people and through their specific memories. So we were actually lucky enough to meet Bella Epstein. Here you see she is pictured here with her sister as a little girl. She grew up in 103 Orchard Street in the 1950s. And we invited her back to her childhood home to share memories with us about growing up here, what her apartment was like, what she remembered about her family and her parents' experiences. And this is really, really important for us at the museum. Wherever possible within our interpretation, we work with descendants of the families that we're talking about, or in this case, the people themselves who lived the experiences that we will then be interpreting with visitors. So that kind of collaboration is really key and allows us to really design the exhibit from the memories that Bella Epstein was sharing with us. So I wanted to share actually one of those memories with you before we talk a little bit about sort of how we think about the interpretation and constructing the exhibit. I want to actually let Bella tell a story for you. So here we see the hallway of this building. The family lived in apartment 7 in this pretty typical tenement building in the Lower East Side. And what you're about to hear is Bella returning back home to her childhood apartment building after about 50 years away.
This is my apartment. I can't believe it. This is where you looked to see if a stranger, my parents always told me, always look here, never open up the door unless you're sure you know who it is. This could be the mezuzah that we had put up because we never lived without a mezuzah to protect us, which was brave of my parents considering that they'd always been persecuted because they were Jewish. And no matter what, I always put a mezuzah up in my house, wherever I live, on every room. Wow.
So this was an incredibly special moment for the museum to be able to invite Bella back, have her share this memory. And so much of the museum's interpretation and the way that we think about this family's story really is present in this memory that Bella shares. The first being really thinking about object-based storytelling and how objects can be anchors and very powerful vehicles for stories that helped connect us to each other, to the particular, and to the universal. And we've recreated the rooms of the family's apartment with some of these memories of objects. So you see here a dining table with 4 chairs, a side table with the family's Sabbath candlesticks that they would light every Friday night before the weekly Jewish holiday. And, we were really able to, in our interpretation, think about how Bella's memories help activate the space and bring it to life for visitors, but also how those objects can be portals into connections to themes and connections across time. And you hear Bella, right, bring the story all the way up to today, that she puts a mezuzah in every room of her house, wherever she lives, and the connection to themes, right? Themes of protection, of creating home, of how Kalman and Rivka Epstein are planting new roots in New York City as Holocaust survivors. And, I'll just share a couple of other stories from the family that have really helped us generate some of this connectivity and really think about thematic storytelling within our exhibit. We here have a photograph of Kalman and Rivka on the left, and on the right is Kalman Epstein's declaration of intent to become a U.S. citizen. This was filed when they arrived in April of 1947. And we're able to share with visitors, a little bit about Kalman and Rivka's experience. They were both in prison and concentration camps. Both were then in a displaced persons camp at the end of the war. That's where they met. That's where they married. And then they come to New York City as part of an executive order issued by President Truman that really opens up the U.S. immigration law that had been very restrictive for decades, since the 1920s. So we can use the story of their entrance to the country, their entrance to New York, to connect to ideas today about restriction and who is considered sort of allowed in the United States or not, and really look at our mythology as a country about times when we have been welcoming or not. And so the parents are, starting a new chapter of their lives in New York City, and doing so in a pretty diverse neighborhood. That here we see some photographs around this side table. Here again is Bella and her sister out on the sidewalk, and they are growing up in a neighborhood that has Puerto Rican residents, older Jewish residents, not that many other Holocaust survivors. And so we start to look at the ways in which the parents' and children's experiences are different, and how that generational difference helps us create connections to our visitors. That what is it like to grow up in a diverse place? How are Kalman and Rivka making connections in the neighborhood and finding community different from their children? Where are they making friends? We see, a photograph here of their second wedding that they host in New York. What is their moments of joy and celebration and creation in New York City? Where are they seeking guidance from older relatives where they have them? That on the right, you see a photograph of Jacob and Golda Epstein. These are Kalman's aunt and uncle, who are already in New York when Kalman and Rivka arrive and help them get settled. They serve as their sponsors. They in the case of Golda, teaches Rivka to cook. So, we look at these stories of generational differences, of creating community, of resilience, and how Coleman and Rivka are navigating life in this diverse neighborhood of the Lower East Side. And we are then able to really draw out for visitors these ways in which the stories of this particular moment and this particular place might connect to their own experiences. So it's always really important for the museum on our guided tours to connect to visitors' own experiences. And one of the ways that we do that is really in thinking about our interpretation, and in particular, putting values to our interpretation. So what are the ways in which we are telling these stories to create both a specific and a broader connection for our visitors? And so I wanted to share with you, these values that we developed actually not too long ago, maybe about 2 years ago. We developed these values to sort of guide our decision-making around a story like the Epsteins, so that we could make connections to our visitors, make connections to present day. And so I'll just share these with you here. You see there's 6 values that we had determined. And the first is agency, that we really look in all of our stories at decision-making, right? And this is particularly crucial for the Epstein story, looking at their experience of forced migration and not having full agency. Where then, in starting a new life, are they making decisions? Are they raising their family in ways that are guided by their past? Specificity. We really look at a very micro level history to connect to historical context. Inclusivity. We look at experiences of a wide range of individuals and groups across our tours, and always look to create experiences that people can connect to from their particular perspective. Complexity. We look at a personal story to challenge mythology and sort of these dominant narratives that develop about the United States, about the Lower East Side, about migration. Accountability. We share what we know about our content and our stories, and what we don't know, right? It's very important for us where we don't know to say that, and to hold ourselves accountable to the latest scholarship, and to our descendants that we work with, like Bella Epstein. And then empathy is often at the center of what we think about in making connections with our visitors, that we really at our most foundational look at stories of people, and how do we help our visitors understand the Epsteins and their children as people trying to make their way in a new environment, and building that empathy through an exhibit that is a home, that doesn't have, velvet ropes or glass cases up. We don't have wall text in our exhibits. We really invite people into these home spaces, and invite people to sit on the beds in the daughter's bedroom, to have conversations with us about their own experiences and lives. And that interplay, so that connection between our interpretation as a museum, our visitors, and these spaces is what really helps us also connect past to present. That we can really think about questions with our visitors, like what is passed down through generations, and how do we each tell our own stories, and what is important within our stories. So, that brings us to, this photograph of looking at Bella as a young girl. And then here's Bella as a grandmother. This photo was taken in 2017 when the exhibit opened. And here you see on either side, the Puerto Rican family and the Chinese American family on either side of the Epsteins. But Bella Epstein here is pictured with her children, her husband, her grandchildren. And we're able to invite visitors to, hear how for the Epsteins, Coleman and Rivka didn't really pass down stories of what they had experienced during the Holocaust, that they kept those stories very, very close within them until they were much older. And for Bella, it was really the names of her ancestors that became one of the most important things to pass down. And then ultimately, the way in which her family's experience as Holocaust survivors did shape how she thinks about herself as a Jewish woman today, as someone who puts up protection of a mezuzah on every doorframe. And having that real story from Bella allows us to again, draw out experiences that our visitors might have and create space to reflect on how trauma and resilience and community run through the Epstein story, run through other stories of displaced people, of people with refugee status, of people who have experienced forced migration, and really look at these wider umbrellas of experiences from the stories and memories of a particular family. And so with that, I am going to now, I believe, pass it back to Zach to introduce Stacy Halfmoon, and I look forward to your questions in a little while.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was very, very informative. And I think sort of just to get the ball rolling on questions, a lot of what the commonalities when we were discussing this were between this idea of using real stories and spaces of reflection and those themes of resilience and survivance. So I think as we progress through the program, you'll see some of those threads. With that, though, I would love to introduce Stacy Halfmoon, who is a citizen of the Caddo Nation and is also Choctaw in Delaware. She has 25 years of professional experience in cultural preservation, tribal liaison work, tribal consultation, cultural resource law, and museum leadership. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Oklahoma, my alma mater, go Sooners, in anthropology, as well as certificates, trainings, and courseworks in museum studies, cultural resource law, and consultation practices. She served as director of the Outreach and Museum Programs for American Indian Cultural Center and Museum in Oklahoma, now the First Americans Museum, served as the inaugural director of the American Indians Relations for the Ohio History Connection. And since 2019, Stacy has held the position of senior director of the Choctaw Cultural Center in Durant, Oklahoma, which opened its doors to the public on July 23rd, 2021. Stacy, it is so good to have you. I mean, I can't imagine opening a museum in July of 2021. So I know you have a really exciting presentation plan, but first you can just talk a little bit about some of I'm sure there were many challenges that faced you while opening a museum in the height of a pandemic in Oklahoma. Stacy.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this opportunity to share today. I really appreciate it. And I will certainly share a little bit when I move into my presentation about the challenges. As you all may be able to imagine, trying to open a brand new project. And this, the Choctaw Cultural Center is the first cultural center / museum for the Choctaw Nation, which is one of the largest nations in the United States. So there was so much thought that was put into it, so many hopes and dreams for the project. And so when COVID happened, we certainly hit a few bumps in the road related to everyone being sent home for a period of time and trying to continue construction, trying to have the staff continue to come on board. We were hiring staff for the new cultural center. That got impacted. So we just did the best we could do, and we continued to push the opening date back until everything worked out. So we've been open now 3 months, which feels like 3 years, but it's really been an amazing experience. So I'm happy to share a little more about that as I move into kind of the story of the Cultural Center today. Okay, well, again, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've already been so inspired by hearing everything happening. Sometimes you can be in your own little world of what you've been focused on, and then you hear of all the fantastic things, the catalog, everything at the Tenement Museum. It's just all very impressive and exciting. So it's exciting to be a part of this dialogue. Just to give a little bit of background on Oklahoma, as you all may know, my home. My grandmother was Choctaw, and she was from this area where I live now. And then my grandfather was Caddo in Delaware. So when you were talking about Lenape, the Delaware coming from that region up where you are today. And there are 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma today. So growing up here, you really have an opportunity. I don't think I even realized it till later in life, how unique the opportunity was. My grandparents would be part of these churches that had, a Kiowa hymn singer, and then our pastor was Creek and Seminole, and we had Caddo elders, and just this beautiful tapestry of Native culture. Despite all the challenges that, the tribes had been through and their different stories that led them all to being in Oklahoma, or what was Indian territory prior to Oklahoma. So it's just been such a blessed career. I don't think, sometimes you don't set out, you're not sure where the path will take you, but what a blessing and what an experience. And especially to work for Choctaw Nation. And I'm, part of, I think, something I try to do is honor my ancestors. And so I hope that coming here and working with Choctaw Nation, that was such an opportunity and a blessing to me. And I hope my grandmother, Mimi, Corinne Halfmoon, is loving that I'm here in Durant, Oklahoma. So we'll move through. I want to share about the Choctaw Cultural Center. The Cultural Center houses the entire story of the Choctaw people, in particular in an exhibit that I'm going to talk about today. But this is a place that really connects the Choctaw past with the present and the future. So this is a very special place. It's located near the tribal headquarters for the Choctaw Nation, which is in Durant, Oklahoma. The footprint of the Cultural Center covers just over 20 acres, and the facility itself covers over 100,000 square feet. And to even arrive at the place where we were able to open such a beautiful facility, it truly is. It's truly impressive and admirable with the Choctaw Nation, their tribal council that approved this. What they wanted to invest in culture and in a place that's for community, but also for the public to learn the story and the history of the Choctaw people. And the process of getting this far involved so many different people, so many different years, project leaders. There was a cultural committee involved that did a lot of the groundwork in helping to think about what everything you see actually has a lot of meaning. I won't be able to go into all of it, but every element of the Choctaw Cultural Center has significant meaning. There was also community surveys, community work done, interviews, going out to make sure that the Cultural Center would meet the needs of the Choctaw people. And then even looking nationally at what other museums and cultural centers were doing, that was important to the group that was laying out the designs for this cultural center. So they traveled all over the United States to have meetings with other tribal cultural centers and museums and understand lessons learned and get advice. So a lot went into this. Then the tribal council had to approve. And they passed a tribal resolution in support of establishing the Cultural Center in 2017. And then next, it's working with all the designers. We had an amazing team between the architects, the landscape architect. We actually have a mound, a massive mound on site that pays tribute to the Choctaw mound building culture. Everybody from the exhibit designers, the multimedia company. So a lot of thought went into the Choctaw Cultural Center. And then as we were talking about, I wanted to share, because this was such a special day for everybody, that we were able to open July 23rd, 2021. And you see here on the right, You see Chief Batten, that's the chief of the Choctaw Nation, and the entire tribal council, along with Sue Folsom is in the center there, getting ready to cut that beautiful ribbon. And, this was a really special day, and these were all the people that made sure it happened. So, as Zach mentioned, COVID, Choctaw Nation is so special, and it's hard to, I want to stay on track with time, but honestly, even with the impacts from COVID, and they were significant because a lot of our consultants and the companies we were working with to build the cultural center, in particular the exhibits, they were not from Oklahoma. They were out of state. There was a company in New York. There was another company in Connecticut. And so we had a real challenge in doing everything from afar, but we truly have very dedicated people and staff and Choctaw Nation supporting our team to hold us together and to let us continue to hire even remotely so that we can move forward with the cultural center plans. So I can always share more about the challenges if you're interested, but it really did culminate in a very special day. So just to share a little bit about the permanent exhibition at the Cultural Center, we call the permanent exhibition Choctaw Noa Aya, and that means the Choctaw Journey. And this exhibit covers approximately 12,000 square feet. It includes everything from the origin stories of the Choctaw people, including even ancestral, looking back about 1,000 years. There's an exploration of an ancestral city, how the ancestors of the Choctaw people were living there. Very immersive exhibits. It is one of the most immersive exhibits I've personally ever seen. There's a portion of the exhibit where you move into caves and a cave setting, and that's where you hear those origin stories of the Choctaw people. It carries you all the way through the removal of the Choctaw people to present day. And so everything in this exhibit was told and intentionally designed this way to be told from a first person narrative. So what you're seeing even on this slide, there's an image of what we call the orientation gallery. And before you even move into the rest of the exhibit, you see that Choctaw people are living people, and these are all Choctaw individuals from different districts of the Choctaw Nation who are contemporary people doing different things. One is he owns a small business. Another is on staff at the Cultural Center now. He's playing stickball. And just these, I think similar to the other presentation, we were seeing that focus on the human element and these individuals and their stories. I want to mention that one more part of the approach to the Cultural Center that was very important was that tribal artists and community members played a significant part in the development of these exhibits. So we were able to commission Choctaw artists and community members to design pieces. In some cases, the pieces hadn't been made in over 200 years, and they were studied. We have a fantastic historic preservation department that really looked at some of these materials in museums, and we made them again for the first time so that they could be on exhibit here at the Cultural Center. We have live casts in the Cultural Center that are actual community members, so everybody kind of gets a kick out of that. When they go through, you can see, those individuals can see themselves, and they bring their family sometimes to see their live cast in the exhibits. But just really uplifting the community in this exhibit was of primary importance. And then I wanted to share some of the approach, which I think is very powerful in our exhibits, to the graphic panels and the content and the text. So, it was decided by the Choctaw Cultural Team that the exhibit design, working with exhibit designers and our media partners, that the story of the Choctaw people would be told factually from the perspective and voice of the Choctaw people, and without holding back hard truths about what Choctaw people experienced. So in addition to text and graphic panels, we have a moving media program where you can see, hear, and feel, literally feel some of these Choctaw experiences that were related to the treaty negotiations, the Choctaw fight to retain their sovereignty, and the arduous and horrific implications from removal. So here are a couple cool examples, I think, when we talk about the Battle of Mobila and Hernando de Soto leading an army into the Choctaw homeland in 1540, having recently helped subjugate Inca Empire. His goal was to do the same to the southeast. A leader named Tuscaloosa, or Black Warrior, confronted the army at the village. The Spanish struck first and ran from the ferocity of the counterattack. During the battle, our ancestors inflicted more than 700 arrow wounds on their armor-clad opponents. The cost was high, though. Nearly all of Tuscaloosa's men died in the conflict. So I think, this theme of first person and telling these stories from a Choctaw perspective continues throughout the entire exhibit. I grabbed another shot right here that talks about the Trail of Tears for the Choctaw people. And you can read this part, with no lands remaining, most Choctaws moved to Indian territory. American leaders called it removal, but the Choctaw leaders called it the Trail of Tears and Death. And that's actually where the phrase Trail of Tears came from, was the Choctaw experience following the removal. So then I wanted to give you an example of the way this approach was used in our exhibition. When we talk about forced migrations, we often talk about what was left behind, and what was lost. And so we certainly talk about that in this exhibition. And here you actually see a couple of the items. It's very challenging to find cultural items from that removal period because of how tumultuous it was and violent. And when you're uprooted, you don't have a chance to bring much with you. So that's addressed here. Then when, even post-removal, we move into different periods in United States history where tribal governments, if they were able to survive that part, were faced with other challenges like relocation, termination. So these continue to face the Choctaw people, as well as other nations, of course, who were continually faced with a changing tide of federal policy related to Native people. So we share stories of how the Choctaw people were able to organize and react to these events. And I think it really demonstrates part of what you see when you move through this exhibit is the tenacity, the intelligence, and the strength of the Choctaw people and culture throughout all of this history, but in particular, that challenge of removal and having to reestablish your government in new lands. We were talking about themes, and I think some of the themes you'll see in this Choctaw exhibit that continue from the orientation film all the way to the very last experience about warriors. There's a theme of Tushka, which means warrior in Choctaw, and it's that warrior spirit and what it meant ancestrally, how that carried through to the Choctaw having even code talkers of World War I that were instrumental for the United States, fighting through every major conflict, supporting the United States, and then even to today, what that means to be a Tushka or a warrior. There's another theme of servant leadership, and the decisions that the Choctaw people had to make were always for what's best for the community. Putting the community first, never about the individual, and that you are a servant and you lead through that servancy and making the right decisions. And so that's really explored in there's a film on sovereignty that talks a lot about what kind of pressure those tribal leaders felt that were having to negotiate the treaties and sign treaties like the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, which essentially removed the Choctaw people. But they knew that's what was necessary to keep the tribe together to retain sovereignty. So some of those themes are certainly explored, carrying through to the fact that we're a living culture today. The Choctaw people are not extinct. Native people are not extinct. These are living cultures. These are communities today that are alive and well and are continuing to carry on that culture to revitalize other traditions. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of points when we talk about the Choctaw removal experience. I think is really important when you think about forced migration and other tribal nations and other cultures that have gone through something similar. I think the Choctaw experience has two important elements that we can think about. One is that the Choctaw retained enough agency. We were talking about agency earlier in the other presentation. The Choctaw retained enough agency in their negotiations with American leaders to be able to choose whether they wanted to retain their sovereignty but leave their homelands or stay and lose their sovereignty. And so, I think that can be a little bit of a difference in some of these other situations. And certainly that agency is what allowed the Choctaw Nation to decide they did want to leave so that they could stay a sovereign nation, move together, stay a community, and move to Indian Territory. And then secondly, even post-removal, Choctaw Nation did retain that sovereignty. They're a sovereign nation today. They have lands spanning 10 and a half counties in southeastern Oklahoma. They're one of the largest tribes as far as land base and citizens in the United States. And there are over 200,000 tribal citizens of the Choctaw Nation. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think those are important points about the history of the Choctaw people. And at the Cultural Center today, in addition to the exhibition I'm sharing, our Choctaw Noat Aya, the permanent exhibition, we have a changing exhibition that talks about long ago stories of the Choctaw people, where we really explore and actually get to hear in Choctaw and English stories, different stories that have survived through time of Choctaw people, and even some of the natural elements and how corn was gifted to the Choctaw people. We have classrooms so that we can revitalize and continue to teach all of the traditional arts. So that was a pretty unique thing, I think, for our cultural center, is that we continue to it's a living cultural center, and I think that's what sets it apart from a museum. However, we absolutely have collections, and we're working to build those collections and unite those collections now that we have a state-of-the-art space for all of the cultural items, and we have an archive. But it is a living cultural center. So it's a really interesting blend. It's not what you would think of when you think of a traditional museum, although we certainly have some of those elements. But what's exciting about it is, and one of our goals is to retain that connection to Choctaw community and people. Because if the Choctaw people don't value this cultural center, feel welcome there, want to come there to take classes and engage in the different programs, then we haven't done our job, and we would lose that connection to community. And then when anyone from the public comes to learn about Choctaw people, and this is open to the public, that connection to authenticity, that connection to your community, that's only going to enhance any visitor's experience when they come. When you see Choctaw people there and you hear the language being spoken, or you see a stickball game happening, it enhances the experience for everybody. So that's where we are right now. Very exciting project. Again, we've been open 3 months, so we're all dreaming really big still right now about all the things we want to do, rotating in new exhibits. But I just wanted to take that time to share with you kind of our approach and the way it was decided that the truth telling and some of those hard truths about the Choctaw history would be shared in our exhibition.
Stacy, thank you so much. This was, we talked about this, I think a conversation that's not heard a lot by people who didn't grow up in Oklahoma. So thank you also for sharing your personal story. That was great. And you sort of segued perfectly into some of the questions we have. First of all, there's one question about what's the meaning behind the logo of the Choctaw Cultural Center, just briefly.
Yes, that is an ancient symbol. It is so ancient, it probably goes back even to, the Choctaw are Muskogean speaking people. So there are other Chickasaw, Choctaw Creek. There are other tribes that are Muskogean, and that's an ancient symbol that you see on pottery that has continued through time. So it is so old, it could mean a few different things. It could mean kind of the journey of the sun and moon through the sky across. It can mean several different things that I won't go into, but I'm so glad you picked up on that.
That is great. That was not me. That was actually Kayla. So thank you, Kayla.
Yeah.
And it was something that I looked at that logo for, we've been in contact for a couple of months and hadn't thought to ask that. One question, sort of combining several questions. This is for you, Stacy and Catherine. Questions about the educational aspect of this, because I know you sort of very kind of greatly touched on that, Stacy, but maybe elaborate a little more on the educational departments, and then also sort of what goes into, very briefly, kind of who decides what goes into the exhibitions, which Stacy, you mentioned a little. So I think maybe we had some questions about what happens at the Tenement Museum. So Catherine, if you want to start, and then we'll lob it back to Stacy, maybe.
Sure, that sounds great. And also, Stacy, thank you. So that was just so wonderful to hear about the work that is going on, and congratulations on opening. It is an incredible accomplishment. So the Tenement Museum is, as far as our education department, we are actually structured differently than many museums in that our education department is actually the biggest department in the museum. And we have a bigger education department than we have a curatorial department. So our education department includes all of our public programming and our school programming. And we, think about really designing experiences that help bring in people of all ages to the museum stories. And also spend a lot of time on training, because our museum is only accessible by guided tour. So we develop tours and lessons that help bring in young people to these stories. And as far as who makes decisions about what goes into the exhibit, it's really a collaboration between the museum's education and curatorial departments, and then often the descendant family. So in the case of Bella Epstein, we really worked very closely with Bella and offered, okay, there might be things that she didn't want us to share with the public. And so those decisions about what stories we tell in the museum are very much guided by especially the living descendants and people who have lived these experiences, and really where we have access to their stories, letting them lead the way.
And that's great. That actually ties in to another question we have about sort of what are the best resources in sort of preserving history. And I think, Stacy, we can take this back to you, this idea of memories and living memories. Would you agree with that, sort of going to the source material when possible?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. We have several projects at Choctaw Nation. We have a Choctaw Foundation, and one of their goals has been to get as many recorded histories as possible. I think the Choctaw in particular have a lot that was written. They're a very educated tribe. They adopted education very early on because they saw the benefit in that. And so I think there are quite a few resources, and we have a historic preservation department that just does a tremendous amount of research and publishing all the time. There's a Iti Fabasa articles that come out regularly about that history, about people's memories, what they've handed down about those stories. Yeah, absolutely. Very important.
And then sort of one question maybe for the both of you, sort of tying in a couple of these other things we have, is do you think it's possible, because it's sort of the common themes I saw between both of these wonderful institutions, is that you're using sort of immersive experiences, personal experiences to create empathy. Do you think it's possible to do this in other institutions that don't have your resources? And if so, do you have any tips for emerging professionals, or would you like it to be possible? Which is a loaded question. We don't have a lot of time, but I think it kind of ties everything together nicely. Whoever wants to answer first, go for it.
I was going to let.
Go for it. Go for it.
Go, Catherine. Catherine, go.
Well, that's a great question. And, again, when you talk about authenticity, right, I think you have to have that connection to the community to really do that deep work and to build trust so that you're working with people and you're in an organic way, you're able to share those things. But should other museums strive to do it? Absolutely. Develop partnerships, connect to the people that are connected to your collections. I think there's so much work that can be done there. And once those connections are built and there's more trust and, partnership opportunities, that's how this can be born. People want to share their stories, but you do have to be thoughtful and connect to people kind of in an organic way for that to happen. That's my 2 cents.
Great.
Yeah. No, I think what I was considering was actually deepened by hearing what you were saying, Stacy, is just the importance of relationship building. Whether, at least for us at the Tenement Museum, that relationship building might be with our descendant families whose stories we're sharing. It might be with the communities surrounding the museum and bringing them in to our exhibits and programs, which which we do work on, as part of the education efforts. And then it's also relationship building with our visitors, and thinking about when you're with us in the exhibit in the space, how do you, even if you're only with people for an hour, how do you develop enough of a relationship to create that kind of empathy? So I think it's absolutely possible. It's interesting, right? Because museums, traditionally, we think about objects, but while the objects are important, it's about the people, right? And it's about how people connect to those objects, and how we can connect to one another through storytelling. So I think you don't have to have a lot of resources to build empathy and build community around a museum.
Okay, thank you. You have to want to do it. And both of you are wanting to do this and are doing great work that I am so excited about. And I'm honored that you took time to do this. And I know this is like just the start of a conversation. And hopefully it'll spark more conversations from other people. It's all the time we have, though. I'm so sad. So we're going to hand it back to Laura, but I want to thank you all so much. And if you're ever in Oklahoma, go see Stacy, Lower East Side, Catherine, go to the Tenement Museum. And I just want to thank you personally for being a part of this. It was a great pleasure to work with you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach and Stacy.
Yeah, thank you. Yakoki.
I've just been sitting here reflecting on this really powerful conversation, part of it about crafting spaces and helping people navigate these spaces. And really what I'm thinking about is we're at a point in our society where there is a push to deny people's humanity, to deny people's stories. There's so much distortion and a denial of people's experiences. And so I'm thinking a lot about the work that all of you do in terms of building relationships, recognizing each other, respecting each other, and how important it is to mark these moments right now in our culture and to have spaces where you can have these conversations. So I moved to tears, and I wanted to say thank you to Catherine, to Stacy, to Zach, and to Kat, and to the entire community of people who've been here listening to this. I hope it's a conversation we can continue, because we could have certainly gone on for a much longer period of time. But I just also want to acknowledge the powerful work that all of you are doing, because it's because of you that we still have places in our society to come together and have complicated conversations, but also recognizing the experiences that really unite us as human beings. So on behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and everyone involved, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon. Stay safe, be well.